The sirens were already wailing when I finally let the file slip from my hands. Papers scattered across the restaurant floor like dead leaves, each one a death certificate for the life I thought I knew. Douglas was screaming something about misunderstandings, about how I was overreacting, but his voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. The waitress stood behind me with her hand on my shoulder, and I remember thinking how strange it was that a complete stranger's touch felt more real than my husband's embrace ever had. That's where this story peaks, but to understand how I got there, you need to go back 3 months earlier to a Tuesday morning that started like any other Tuesday in my perfectly ordinary life. 3 months earlier, I was standing in our kitchen in Chicago, watching Douglas butter his toast with the same methodical precision he brought to everything. We'd been married for 32 years, and I knew his morning routine better than I knew my own heartbeat. Coffee black, no sugar, 2 pieces of wheat toast, butter but never jam. The Tribune folded to the business section, even though he'd been retired for 5 years. The morning light filtered through our kitchen window, casting long shadows across the marble countertop we'd saved 3 years to afford. I remember thinking how beautiful it looked, that golden September light turning everything warm and honey-colored. Douglas looked up at me with those gentle brown eyes and smiled, and I felt that familiar warmth spread through my chest. His reading glasses sat perched on his nose, the same tortoiseshell frames he'd worn for a decade. There was a small coffee stain on his collar that I'd need to treat before washing. These were the details of my life. Small, comfortable, safe. This was my life. This was love. This was security. Our apartment overlooked Lake Michigan, a reward for decades of careful saving and smart decisions, or so I thought. From our living room window, you could see the water stretch out endlessly, changing colors with the weather. Stormy gray on cloudy days, brilliant blue when the sun came out, almost black at night when the city lights reflected off its surface. I'd spent countless hours at that window, coffee in hand, watching joggers and cyclists on the lakefront path below, feeling grateful for what we'd built together. Douglas had always handled our finances. It wasn't even a discussion we'd had, really. Back when we got married in the early 90s, that's just how things worked. He was good with numbers, worked in accounting for 40 years, and I trusted him completely. Why wouldn't I? He'd never given me a reason not to. Every month he'd sit at the dining room table with his calculator and checkbook, nodding to himself as he balanced everything out. The scratch of his pen on paper, the click of the calculator keys, the satisfied grunt when everything added up, these sounds were the soundtrack of our financial life. I'd bring him coffee while he worked, and he'd pat my hand absently, tell me everything was on track. We were building something, he'd say, securing our future. Told me we were on track for that retirement dream home in Arizona, the one with the big porch where we could watch sunsets together. He'd show me pictures he'd printed from real estate websites. Adobe-style houses with red tile roofs and desert gardens. We'd sit together on the couch, his arm around my shoulders, planning a future that felt close enough to touch. I believed him. God, I believed every word. The first crack appeared so small, I almost missed it. We were at our favorite Italian place in Little Italy, the one with the red and white checkered tablecloths, and the owner who always remembered our names. Salvatore's. We'd been going there for 15 years, ever since we moved to this neighborhood. The smell of garlic and basil, the warm lighting from those fake candles in red glass holders, the mural of Venice on the back wall that was probably painted by someone who'd never been to Italy. It was our place, our tradition. Douglas ordered the veal, I got the chicken marsala, same as always. The waitress, a middle-aged woman named Maria, who'd worked there for years, knew our order by heart, but always let us say it anyway. She'd wink at me when she brought the bread basket, knowing I'd eat most of it while Douglas lectured me about carbs. Everything was normal until I mentioned maybe taking a trip to visit my sister in Phoenix. Just a weekend thing, nothing fancy. Douglas got this look on his face, this quick flash of something I couldn't quite name. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then he smiled and said we should probably hold off on any travel for a bit. Budget was tight, he said. Unexpected expense had come up. What expense? I asked, keeping my tone light and curious, not wanting to seem like I was questioning him. He waved his hand dismissively, that gesture I'd seen 1,000 times. Nothing to worry about, just some repairs on the car. The transmission's acting up. You know how it is with these older vehicles. Our car was only 3 years old. The transmission had been fine that morning when I drove to the grocery store. But I nodded, pushed a piece of chicken around my plate, and changed the subject. Asked him how his golf game was going. Watched his shoulders relax as he launched into a story about his latest round with the guys from his old office. I didn't push it. That was my first mistake. Looking back now, I can see how perfectly he'd constructed the cage. But when you're inside it, when the bars are invisible, you just think you're living in a house. You don't question why certain doors are always locked. Douglas had this way of making me feel like my concerns were silly, like I was worrying about nothing. When I asked about our savings account, he'd pat my hand and say everything was fine, that I shouldn't trouble myself with the details. You've got enough on your plate, he'd say. Let me handle the boring stuff. And it did seem boring. Numbers and spreadsheets and tax forms. Who wanted to spend their time on that when I could be meeting friends for lunch, or working in the community garden, or reading the stack of novels I'd been collecting? When I suggested maybe I should look at our statements, just to stay informed, he'd get this wounded expression like I didn't trust him. His eyes would go all sad and disappointed, like I'd accused him of something terrible. After all these years, he'd say softly, you really think I'd do something to hurt us? And then I'd feel guilty for even bringing it up. Isn't that something? The person lying to you makes you feel bad for suspecting the truth. You're probably screaming at your screen right now, telling me I should have known better. Trust me, I've screamed at myself plenty. But manipulation doesn't announce itself with trumpets and warning signs. It seeps in slowly, like carbon monoxide, and by the time you realize something's wrong, you're already halfway gone. The thing about Douglas was that he was so good at being the victim. Whenever I questioned anything, he'd turn it around somehow. Make it about how hard he worked, how much stress he was under managing everything, how he was just trying to protect me from worry. He'd sigh heavily, rub his temples like he had a headache, and I'd end up rubbing his shoulders and apologizing. Can you imagine? Apologizing for wanting to know about my own money. That Tuesday morning in the kitchen, 3 months before everything exploded, Douglas kissed me on the forehead and told me he had a meeting downtown. Something about finalizing some investment opportunity. He'd been talking about this investment for months, some kind of commercial real estate thing that was going to set us up beautifully. It's a strip mall in a developing area, he'd explained weeks earlier, spreading out brochures on our dining table, right in the path of growth. The returns are going to be significant, maybe 12 to 15% annually. He showed me glossy photos of storefronts and parking lots, charts with arrows pointing upward. It all looked very official and professional. He needed me to sign some papers, he said. Just formalities, standard stuff for joint investments. I signed them at the kitchen table without reading them. He held the pen for me, pointed where my signature should go, and I did it. Just like that. Signed away pieces of my life with the same hand that wore his wedding ring. The papers were thick, full of legal language that made my eyes glaze over. Don't worry about all the jargon, Douglas said. It's just lawyer speak. Basically says we're investing $50,000 in the property development. $50,000. It sounded like a lot, but Douglas assured me it was a smart move. We had it to spare, he said, and the returns would more than make up for the initial investment. I spent that day the way I spent most days back then. Cleaned the apartment, even though it was already clean. The rhythmic motion of wiping down counters, the satisfaction of vacuum lines in the carpet, the fresh smell of lemon cleaner. Made a grocery list. Called my daughter Emily, who lived in Boston with her own family. She asked how I was doing, and I said fine, everything's fine. That's what you say when you don't even realize you're drowning. Everything's fine. The water's only up to your neck, but everything's fine. Emily told me about her kids, my grandchildren, How Matthew was struggling with algebra but excelling in art. How Sophie had made the volleyball team and was practicing every day after school. I listened to her voice, warm and animated, and felt that bittersweet ache of missing them. "We should visit soon," I said. "Maybe for Thanksgiving?" "That would be wonderful, Mom. The kids would love it. Should I book flights, or are you guys driving?" "I'll have to check with your father," I heard myself say, always checking with Douglas, always deferring to his schedule, his plans, his decisions. When had that become my default response? That evening, Douglas came home later than usual, said the meeting ran long, but it went well. Really well. He was excited, animated in a way I hadn't seen in years. His cheeks were flushed, his eyes bright. He loosened his tie as he walked in, something he only did when he was particularly pleased about something. Opened a bottle of wine to celebrate, the good stuff we saved for special occasions. A Napa Valley Cabernet we'd bought on our 30th anniversary trip. Told me this investment was going to change everything for us. We'd have that Arizona house sooner than we thought. Maybe even travel a bit first. Europe, maybe. I'd always wanted to see Italy. The real Italy, not just the mural on the back wall of Salvatore's. "We could do Rome, Florence, Venice," he said, his arm around my waist as we stood at our window looking out at the lake. "Take our time. Eat real pasta. Drink real wine. You deserve it, sweetheart. You've been so patient while I got everything in order." I let myself dream. That's the cruelest part, I think. He let me dream about a future he was already stealing from me. I imagined us walking through cobblestone streets, holding hands in front of the Trevi Fountain, sitting at a cafe in Tuscany. The dream felt so real I could almost taste the espresso, feel the Mediterranean sun on my face. Time went on. Weeks turned into a month. Douglas kept having these meetings, kept talking about how well things were going. He'd come home with updates, always positive, always promising. "The development is ahead of schedule," he'd say. Or, "The anchor tenant just signed a 10-year lease." Each piece of news was designed to reassure me, to keep me believing. But I started noticing other things. Small things. The way he'd angle his laptop screen away from me when I walked into the room. How he started keeping his phone face down on the table. The new password on our home computer that he said was for security purposes. "There's been a lot of identity theft lately," he explained. "Can't be too careful." Each little thing was easy to explain away individually, but together they formed a pattern I was too afraid to see. When I walked past him while he was on his computer, he'd quickly minimize windows or switch screens. When his phone rang, he'd sometimes step out onto the balcony to take the call, even in cold weather. "Work stuff," he'd say when he came back in, even though he'd been retired for 5 years. Just some consultation questions from my old colleagues. Then came the cottage. My parents had left me a small property upstate, a little cottage on 3 acres near the Wisconsin border. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. My history. Every summer growing up, we'd spend 2 weeks there. My father taught me to fish in the creek behind the property, showing me how to bait a hook and cast a line. I can still remember the pride in his eyes when I caught my first bass, how he took a photo of me holding it up, both of us grinning. My mother and I would pick wildflowers and press them into books, creating these beautiful dried arrangements we'd frame. The cottage walls had been covered with them. Black-eyed Susans and Queen Anne's lace, purple coneflowers and wild daisies. Each one a memory of a lazy summer afternoon, my mother's hands guiding mine as we arranged stems just so. When they passed, that cottage was the tangible piece of them I had left. It smelled like them, pine and wood smoke, and my mother's lavender sachets. Their furniture was still there, their books on the shelves, their presents in every corner. Douglas started talking about selling it around the same time as the investment opportunity. Said it made sense financially. The property tax was high, we never used it anymore, and the money could go into our retirement fund. The way he explained it, it sounded logical, responsible even, like keeping it would be selfish and impractical. "We haven't been up there in 3 years, he said one evening. We were having dinner, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, comfort food that suddenly felt anything but comfortable. It's just sitting there, costing us money and taxes and maintenance. The roof probably needs work. The plumbing's old. It's a money pit, really. But it's my parents' place, I said quietly. It's where I grew up spending summers. It's memories. Douglas finished for me. I understand, sweetheart. I do. But memories live in here. He tapped his chest. Not in a building. You'll always have those summers with your parents. Selling the cottage doesn't change that. And think of what we could do with the money. Really secure our future. Isn't that what your parents would have wanted? For you to be taken care of. It was a masterful manipulation. Framing the sale as honoring my parents' wishes. Making me feel like keeping it would be contrary to what they'd want for me. And maybe he was right, I thought. Maybe I was being sentimental. Holding on to a building for emotional reasons when the practical thing to do was let it go. I remember standing in that cottage one last time before the sale went through, running my hand along the kitchen counter where my mother used to roll out pie dough. I could almost see her there, flour dusting her apron, humming while she worked, looking at the nail holes in the wall where our family photos used to hang. We'd already packed them away, along with the furniture we wanted to keep. The cottage felt hollow, echoing, already gone, even though we hadn't signed the final papers yet. Douglas stood in the doorway, checking his watch. We need to get going. The realtor's waiting. His tone was gentle but firm. Always gentle, always firm. The perfect balance of caring and controlling. I felt something tear inside me, but I didn't know how to articulate it. How do you explain that you're not just selling a house? You're erasing a part of yourself? I walked through each room one last time. The bedroom where I'd slept as a child, where my grandmother's quilt had covered the bed. The living room where we'd played board games on rainy days. The porch where my father and I would sit in the evenings, watching fireflies and talking about everything and nothing. Goodbye, I whispered to the empty rooms. I'm sorry. I signed those papers too. Let him guide my hand to the signature line. Let him take another piece of me. The realtor, a cheerful woman in her 40s, congratulated us on the sale. You got a great price, she said, over asking. The buyers were thrilled to get it. The money from the cottage sale, Douglas said, would go straight into our retirement account, boost our savings significantly. We'd be thanking ourselves later, he promised. I wanted to believe him. No. That's not quite right. I needed to believe him. Because if I didn't, I'd have to face what I'd just done, what I'd allowed to happen. I keep thinking about that phrase now. Allowed to happen. Like it was my fault for trusting my husband. Like 32 years of marriage should have come with a disclaimer, a warning label. May cause financial ruin and complete betrayal of trust. You know what the statistics say? About 4 million seniors are victimized every year in this country. 4 million. When I first read that number, I couldn't process it. It seemed impossible. But here I am, part of that statistic. Another tally mark in someone's research paper. Another cautionary tale. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back then, 2 months before the restaurant incident, I was still operating under the belief that time would fix things. That's the blind faith I clung to like a life raft. Things had been tight before, and we'd gotten through it. Douglas always figured it out. He was smart with money. He was good at this. If I just waited, if I just trusted the process, everything would work out. That's the lie I told myself every single day. Tomorrow it'll be better. Next week things will settle down. By next month we'll be back on track. I had this bone-deep conviction that patience was a virtue, that faith would be rewarded. My mother used to say that storms pass if you just wait them out. So I waited. And while I waited, Douglas was busy making sure there'd be nothing left when the storm finally cleared. I sacrificed more than the cottage, though that was the biggest tangible loss. I sacrificed my independence without even realizing I was doing it. Stopped checking our mail because Douglas said he'd handle it. He'd bring in the stack from the mailbox, sort through it at his desk, and I never saw most of it. Bills, statements, notices, all filtered through him first. Stopped asking about our finances because it seemed to upset him. Every question I raised was met with that wounded look, that heavy sigh, that implication that I was being difficult or mistrustful. It was easier to stay quiet than to deal with the guilt. Stopped trusting my own instincts because he'd convinced me they were wrong. Little by little, I handed over pieces of myself until I was just this hollow thing going through the motions of a life. There were moments when doubt would creep in. Like when I ran into our old neighbor, Margaret, at the grocery store. She was in the produce section, squeezing avocados, when she spotted me and waved me over. "Oh, honey, I've been meaning to call you," she said, her voice dropping to that conspiratorial tone people use when they're about to share gossip. "I saw Douglas at that downtown casino the other week, the big one near the river. He seemed to be there pretty regularly. Is everything okay?" My stomach dropped. "Casino? No, you must be thinking of someone else. Douglas doesn't gamble." She looked uncertain, her face creasing with concern. I was pretty sure it was him. Distinctive build, you know, and I'd recognize that blue jacket he always wears. But maybe you're right. Maybe I'm getting mixed up. When I asked him about it that night, he laughed it off. We were in the living room. He was reading the paper, and I was pretending to focus on my book. Margaret's getting senile probably confused me with someone else. I've never even been to that casino. I was at the gym that day. He said it so smoothly, so confidently, not a flicker of hesitation. And I believed him. Or maybe I just chose to believe him because the alternative was too frightening. Because if Margaret was right, if Douglas was lying about where he spent his time, what else was he lying about? The financial abuse was surgical in its precision. He didn't take everything at once. He bled me slowly. So slowly, I didn't even feel it happening. A few hundred here for investment fees, a couple thousand there for legal paperwork, always with explanations that sounded reasonable, always with that tone that made me feel stupid for asking. "These lawyers don't come cheap," he'd say when I saw a check he'd written, "but we need someone good to handle the contracts for the investment. Can't cut corners on something this important." Or, "The financial advisor charges a consultation fee. That's normal. Everyone pays it. How else would we know we're making smart decisions?" Each expense seemed justified in isolation. It was only later, when I saw them all together, that I realized how much had been hemorrhaging out of our accounts. My daughter Emily called one Sunday, about 6 weeks before everything fell apart. She wanted to talk about helping out with her kids' college fund, just a small contribution if we could manage it. The tuition costs were getting scary, she said. They were trying to save, but it was hard with the cost of living in Boston. "We're not asking for much, Mom. Maybe 1,000 or 2 if you can spare it. It would really help us get ahead of things before Matthew starts looking at schools." I mentioned it to Douglas, and for the first time, I saw genuine panic in his eyes. Just for a second, but it was there. A flash of fear so intense it stopped my breath. Then he recovered, smoothly explaining that our assets were tied up in the investment, that we couldn't access them right now without penalties. "It's a 5-year commitment," he said. "We pull out early. We lose everything we've put in. Surely Emily can understand that. We're doing this for her too, you know. For all of us. We'll have plenty to help with college when this pays off." Made sense, I thought. These things are complicated. Investment vehicles have rules and restrictions. I was probably being naive to think we could just write a check. Emily was disappointed, but understanding. "No, it's okay, Mom. We'll figure it out. I just thought I'd ask." I felt like I'd let her down, even though Douglas assured me we were doing the right thing long term. Delayed gratification, he called it. Sacrifice now for security later. I was sacrificing, all right, just not for the future I thought I was building. The weeks crawled by. Douglas kept having his meetings, kept coming home with updates about how well things were progressing, but I noticed he'd stopped mentioning the Arizona house. When I brought it up, he'd change the subject or say we needed to wait a bit longer before making those kinds of plans. The goalposts kept moving, But I was so focused on the game, I didn't notice the field kept changing. Then came that Thursday in late September. Emily called, crying. Really crying, her voice breaking up between sobs. Her husband had lost his job, and they were struggling. The company had done layoffs, cutting half the department. They'd been living paycheck to paycheck, and now there was no paycheck. Could we help at all? Just a loan, she said. She'd pay it back. She promised. I felt this maternal instinct kick in, this need to protect my child. I told her, of course, let me talk to Douglas. I'd never heard her sound so desperate, so scared. It broke my heart, my capable, independent daughter reduced to begging her parents for help. When I approached Douglas about it, he exploded, not physically, but emotionally. We were in the kitchen. I'd caught him right as he walked in from one of his meetings. Started shouting about how I didn't understand our financial situation, how I was being irresponsible, how if I'd just trusted his judgment, none of this would be an issue. We can't just throw money at every problem, he yelled, his face red. Do you have any idea how tight things are right now? Do you even pay attention when I explain these things to you? I was so shocked by his reaction that I backed down immediately. Douglas never yelled. Never. In 32 years, I could count on one hand the times he'd raised his voice. Apologized. Told Emily we couldn't help right now. Listened to the silence on the other end of the line and felt like the worst mother in the world. I understand, Mom, Emily finally said, her voice small and hurt. I shouldn't have asked. We'll figure it out. After we hung up, I went to the bathroom and cried. Quiet, ashamed tears that I didn't want Douglas to hear. What kind of mother couldn't help her own child? What kind of grandmother couldn't contribute to college funds or help in an emergency? That night, lying in bed next to Douglas, I felt more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. The man beside me was a stranger. But I didn't know how to reconcile that with the 3 decades we'd spent together. His breathing was steady and even, like he hadn't just screamed at me, like he hadn't just forced me to turn my back on our daughter. So I did what I'd become so good at. I pushed the doubt away, told myself I was overreacting, convinced myself that things would get better. They didn't get better. 2 weeks before the restaurant, I decided to do something I'd never done before. I went to the bank, told Douglas I was meeting a friend for lunch, but instead I drove to our branch on Michigan Avenue and asked to see our account statements. My hands were shaking as I approached the counter. I felt like a criminal, like I was doing something wrong by asking about my own money. The teller looked confused, said she'd need some identification. I showed her my license, explained these were joint accounts. She disappeared into the back for what felt like an eternity, then returned with a manager. The whole time I stood there, I kept thinking Douglas might walk in, might catch me, might know somehow what I was doing. The manager, a kind-looking woman in her 50s with sympathetic eyes, sat me down in a private office and asked if everything was okay. Something in her tone made my stomach drop. She'd seen this before, I realized. Knew what it meant when a woman my age came in asking about accounts she should already have access to. She pulled up our accounts on her computer, and I watched her expression shift from professional to concerned. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyebrows drew together. She clicked through several screens, her frown deepening with each one. She asked if I knew about the recent transfers. What transfers? The large withdrawals over the past 6 months. 50,000 here, 30,000 there. Smaller amounts, 5 and 10,000, scattered throughout. The closed savings account, the one we'd been building for 20 years, gone. Emptied 3 months ago, the second mortgage on our apartment that I'd apparently co-signed for. $300,000 taken out 6 weeks ago. The paperwork had my signature on it, though I had no memory of signing it. I couldn't breathe. The office felt like it was spinning. She kept talking, showing me numbers and dates and signatures that looked like mine, but couldn't possibly be mine because I didn't. How could I not know? Mrs. Harrison, these are very concerning patterns, she said gently. Have you been feeling pressured to sign documents? Has anyone been controlling your access to your accounts? She asked if I wanted to file a report. Report? For what? Against who? My husband? The father of my child? The man I'd spent more than half my life with? I don't. I need to think, I managed to say. Can I get copies of these statements? She printed everything out, a stack of papers 2 inches thick. My entire financial destruction, documented in neat rows of debits and credits. She put them in a folder and handed it to me along with her card. If you need help, she said, her hand on mine. If you're not safe, there are resources. You don't have to go through this alone. I left that bank in a daze, drove home on autopilot, the folder on the passenger seat like a bomb waiting to go off. Sat in our apartment staring at the lake, watching the water move, trying to understand how my entire life had become a lie. The same view I'd loved for years now seemed ominous, all that water dark and churning. When Douglas came home, I confronted him. Carefully, gently, because some part of me still hoped there was an explanation, some reasonable answer that would make all of this make sense. I met him at the door, the bank statements in my hands. I went to the bank today, I said, my voice shaking. I need you to explain some things to me. He had answers, all right. Smooth, practiced answers. He didn't even seem surprised that I'd gone. Just smiled that patient smile and took the papers from my hands. The withdrawals were for the investment. I'd known about those. We discussed this, remember? The development needed capital at various stages. This is normal for commercial real estate. The savings account had been rolled into a better fund. He'd mentioned that. I told you about this months ago. Higher interest rate, better returns. Don't you remember? The second mortgage was strategic, a way to leverage our equity for better returns. It's a common investment strategy. Use low-interest debt to fund higher return investments. This is basic financial planning. I'd signed the papers, didn't I remember? And there it was again. My fault for not remembering. My fault for not paying attention. My fault, my fault, my fault. You were reading your book when I brought them over, he said. I specifically remember because you were at that part in the story you'd been excited about. You signed them while we were watching TV. I asked if you wanted me to go through everything and you said you trusted me. Had that happened? I couldn't remember. Maybe it had. Maybe I was going crazy. Maybe this was all my fault for not paying attention to my own life. Except it wasn't my fault. Those weren't my signatures, or maybe they were, but I'd signed them without understanding what they meant. He'd made sure of that. Handed me papers while I was distracted, cooking dinner or on the phone. Just sign here, honey, just a formality. I'd trusted him. That was my real crime. Trust. The note came exactly 1 week later. Douglas and I were at our regular Italian place, the one where this story began. Salvatore's. We were celebrating, he said. The investment was paying off. Things were about to turn around. We'd gotten the reservation for our usual table, the one in the back corner by the window, where you could watch people walking by on the street. He was animated, cheerful, more like his old self. Ordered a bottle of champagne instead of our usual wine. Nothing but the best tonight, he told Maria when she came to take our order. We're celebrating. I wanted so badly to believe it was true, that maybe my paranoia at the bank had been unfounded, that maybe we really were on the verge of something good, that the manager had been wrong to look so concerned, that I'd misunderstood the statement somehow. We'd just finished our entrees when the waitress, a young woman with kind eyes I hadn't seen before, stopped by our table. She was new, probably in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She freshened our water glasses, asked if we wanted to see the dessert menu. Then, as she turned to leave, she slipped something into my hand. A folded piece of paper, done so quickly and discreetly that Douglas didn't notice. He was checking his phone, smiling at something on the screen. I excused myself to the restroom, my heart pounding. The note felt like it was burning in my hand. In the bathroom, I unfolded it with shaking hands. "Go to the bathroom, now," was written in neat handwriting. I looked up, and the waitress was standing there, having followed me in. She locked the door behind her. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. I know this is scary and weird, but I couldn't not say something. "What is this about?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. What she told me changed everything. She'd recognized Douglas. He'd been there before, multiple times over the past 6 months, always with different women. Always playing the same role, the successful investor with money to spare. Charming them, buying expensive dinners, talking about opportunities. She'd watched the pattern repeat. Different women, same script. "Always older women," she said. "Always well-dressed, like they have money. And he always pays in cash. Big bills. Hundreds. Who does that anymore?" She'd been married to a man like him once, she said. Knew the signs. Had watched me over the past few months. The few times Douglas had brought me there without her being our server. Seen the way I looked at him. The way I believed his every word. The way I'd touch his hand across the table like I was grateful for his attention. She'd been where I was. "I worked up the courage tonight," she said. "I almost didn't. I thought maybe I was wrong, maybe I was projecting. But then I saw you two at that table, and I couldn't." From her apron, she pulled out a folder. Said she'd been debating whether to show me, but she couldn't stand by and watch it happen again. The folder was worn, like she'd been carrying it around for days, working up the nerve. Inside were photocopies, bank statements from accounts I didn't know existed, with Douglas's name on them. She'd gotten them from one of the other women, someone who'd figured out the con and was building a case. Property deeds for our cottage, transferred to an LLC I'd never heard of. Douglas wasn't just selling it to invest the money. He'd transferred it to a shell company he controlled. Legal documents, forged signatures, a paper trail of systematic theft. There were at least 5 other women he'd done this to, the waitress explained. Some his age, some younger. All of them comfortable financially. All of them trusting. The worst part was phase 3, she explained. That's where we were headed. Where the caregiver manipulates documents like power of attorney and wills. Where control becomes complete. She showed me a draft document, obtained from a source she wouldn't name, that would have given Douglas complete authority over my finances and medical decisions. My signature was already there, forged, waiting to be filed. Just waiting for the right moment to execute. "You need to stop him," she said, her hands on my shoulders. "Before he files this. Before you lose everything, including yourself." I don't remember walking back to the table. Don't remember my legs carrying me across that restaurant floor, past the other diners with their pasta and wine and normal lives. Don't remember the look on Douglas's face when he saw me standing there with the folder. But I remember the sound. The restaurant sounds faded away, and all I could hear was the hollow echo of every lie he'd ever told me, every false promise, every manipulation. The words bounced around my skull like empty shells, meaningless and cruel. You know what experts say? This manipulation, this gradual takeover of someone's life, it's a common tactic abusers use to maintain control. They get into your documents, into your finances, into your head, and before you know it, your whole life is in their hands. You're not living anymore. You're just existing in the shape they've carved out for you. I opened the folder on the table, right there between our unfinished wine glasses and the dessert menu we'd never look at. Spread out the evidence like a deck of cards, revealing a losing hand. Douglas's face went through a rapid series of expressions. Confusion, recognition, anger, fear, and finally, something close to resignation. He knew. In that moment, we both knew the game was over. He tried to explain, started talking fast, words tumbling over each other. "This isn't what it looks like. You don't understand. I can explain all of this. Where did you get those? Who gave you those? This is a misunderstanding. It was an investment." He'd been trying to surprise me. I didn't understand. I was overreacting. But his voice had that hollow quality now. Those empty words I could finally hear for what they were. Lies. All lies. 32 years of lies. The other diners were staring now. Conversations had stopped. Forks were suspended halfway to mouths. The manager was approaching, concern on his face. Douglas reached for my hand, but I pulled away. That touch that used to comfort me now felt like poison. The waitress stood nearby, ready to call the police if I needed her to. A stranger showing me more care and protection than my own husband ever had. That's when the sirens started. Not for us, not yet. An ambulance racing by outside, but the sound cut through everything, made it all real. This wasn't a nightmare I could wake up from. This was my life, crumbling in a restaurant in Little Italy while other people ate their pasta and tried not to stare. I thought about my mother then, about what she'd say if she could see me now, about the cottage I'd given up, the piece of her I'd let him take, about all the years I'd spent being the good wife, the trusting wife, the wife who didn't ask questions. And I felt something inside me crack wide open, not break, not shatter, just crack, like a shell that had been holding something trapped for far too long. Douglas was still talking, still trying to manage the situation, to control the narrative. Let's go home and discuss this like adults. You're making a scene. This is embarrassing. Think about what people are thinking. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was thinking about phase 3, about what would have happened if that waitress hadn't intervened. About how close I'd come to losing everything, including my own agency, my own self. About signing that power of attorney document that would have made me a ghost in my own life. This was the moment. The one where everything either fell apart or came together. Where I had to decide if I was going to keep believing his lies or start trusting my own truth. The thumbnail moment of my life, if you will. The woman at the crossroads, evidence scattered on a checkered tablecloth, husband's mask finally fallen away. I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but I stood up anyway. Looked at Douglas, really looked at him, maybe for the first time in years. Saw past the gentle eyes and the patient smile to the calculating predator underneath. And I said the words that would change everything. Not the words he wanted to hear, not apologies or understanding or forgiveness. Just 3 simple words that carried the weight of 32 years of lies. I want a divorce. The restaurant had gone quiet. Everyone was watching now, not even pretending to be discreet about it. Douglas opened his mouth, closed it again. For once in our marriage, he had nothing to say. No smooth explanation. No way to manipulate the situation back into his control. The waitress handed me her phone number, told me to call if I needed anything. Her name was Jessica, she said, and she'd be happy to testify if it came to that. A complete stranger offering me more support than my husband ever had. I walked out of that restaurant with the folder tucked under my arm and my head held high. Behind me, I could hear Douglas starting to cause a scene, his voice rising, demanding I come back, that we could talk about this. But I just kept walking. Out into the Chicago night, into the rest of my life, into whatever came next. That was 3 months ago. 3 months that feel like 3 lifetimes. What followed wasn't easy. God, it was anything but easy. I had to untangle 32 years of financial manipulation, legal documents, forged signatures. Had to accept that the man I'd loved, the father of my child, had been systematically robbing me for years. Had to face my own complicity in it all, the ways I'd ignored red flags and silenced my own instincts. But I also had to learn to fight. And that's where my unlikely ally came in. Douglas's ex-business partner, Richard. We'd never gotten along. I'd always found him abrasive, too blunt, too willing to point out flaws. He had this way of asking uncomfortable questions at dinner parties, of challenging Douglas's stories, of generally being difficult. Now I understood why Douglas had ended that partnership. Richard had asked too many questions, had noticed irregularities, had been, essentially, too honest for Douglas to tolerate. Richard called me 2 days after the restaurant incident, said he'd heard what happened through mutual acquaintances. Word travels fast in our circle. Said he'd been waiting years for someone to finally see through Douglas's act. He had information, he said. Documentation of business deals gone wrong, investors Douglas had defrauded before me, a pattern of financial manipulation stretching back decades. I tried to warn you, Richard said on the phone. Years ago. Remember that Christmas party where I pulled you aside? I did remember. Richard had been drunk, or I thought he was drunk. Told me to watch Douglas carefully. Said something about the numbers not adding up. I dismissed it as jealousy, as bitterness over their dissolved partnership. Had told Douglas about it later, and we'd laughed together about poor Richard and his conspiracy theories. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Chicago, this awkward meeting between two people who'd actively disliked each other for years. Richard was waiting when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee already ordered. He stood when he saw me, and I saw genuine compassion in his eyes. But Richard laid it all out for me, showed me how Douglas operated, the charm offensive, the isolation of the victim, the gradual takeover of finances, the eventual complete control. I was far from the first person Douglas had done this to. I was just the longest-running con, the most successful operation, 32 years of steady theft. Sitting there with Richard, drinking burnt coffee and looking at spreadsheets of my own financial destruction, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about getting my money back. This was about stopping Douglas from doing this to anyone else, about making sure his pattern of abuse ended with me. Richard had an idea. He knew others Douglas had hurt, business partners he'd cheated, friends he'd conned, even his own brother, who'd lost a significant investment in one of Douglas's schemes. What if we brought them all together? What if we pooled our evidence, our stories, our collective strength? Alone, we were just individual victims, easy to dismiss or discredit. Together, we were a case. I won't lie to you. The idea terrified me. Going public with my humiliation, my gullibility, my failure to protect myself. But it also felt right. Empowering even. For years, Douglas had kept me isolated, convinced me that I was the problem, that my concerns were unfounded. Now I was choosing connection, choosing to believe my own experience and validate others' experiences too. We started small. Richard reached out to Douglas's brother, Marcus. Marcus was hesitant at first. Family loyalty runs deep, even when that family has wronged you, but eventually he agreed to meet with us. Brought his own documentation, his own story of betrayal that echoed mine in frightening ways. The same smooth talk, the same promises of returns, the same eventual devastation when the truth came out. He convinced me to invest my inheritance from our father, Marcus told us, his hands shaking as he held his coffee cup. $200,000. It was supposed to double in 5 years. That was 10 years ago. I haven't seen a penny. Then came Patricia, a woman Douglas had briefly dated before our marriage. She'd loaned him money for a business venture that never materialized. Spent years trying to get it back before finally giving up. She'd thought she was the only one. Finding out there was a pattern, that she wasn't uniquely foolish, brought her to tears. "I thought it was my fault," she sobbed. "I thought I should have known better. I've carried that shame for 25 years. One by one, we found them. 7 people in total, spanning 3 decades. Each of us had believed we were special, that our relationship with Douglas was unique. Each of us had been systematically manipulated and robbed, and each of us had stayed silent, too ashamed to speak up, too convinced it was somehow our fault. We met weekly at Richard's office, a small accounting firm he ran near the Loop, compared notes, built a timeline, documented every transaction, every lie, every manipulation. It was painful, looking at the full scope of Douglas's deception laid out on a conference room table. Charts on the walls tracking money flows, timelines showing overlapping cons, a web of deceit so complex it took our breath away. But it was also validating. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overly suspicious. I was a victim of a calculated, long-running con. We all were. The whole time, I pretended everything was normal. Stayed in our apartment while Douglas thought I was just angry, that I'd cool down eventually. He'd moved into the guest room. "Giving me space," he said. Answered his calls with neutral tones. Let him think I was considering reconciliation. Meanwhile, I was building a case against him that would destroy everything he'd constructed. It was Richard who suggested confronting Douglas at his mother's 80th birthday party. At first, I resisted. It seemed cruel, public humiliation at a family event. But Richard pointed out that Douglas had spent his entire life manipulating family dynamics, using emotional occasions to his advantage. The party would have all his family there, all the people he'd convinced that he was successful, generous, trustworthy, all the people who'd enabled his behavior by refusing to question it. Plus, Richard added with a grim smile, Douglas wouldn't be able to run, wouldn't be able to spin the narrative privately to each person. Everyone would hear the truth at once. The week before the party, I barely slept, kept going over what I'd say, how I'd present the evidence. Part of me still couldn't believe I was going to do this. The old me, the one who'd signed papers without reading them and believed every lie, that version of me was screaming in protest. But there was a new me emerging, one who'd been forged in the fire of betrayal. And she was ready to fight. There was one close call, 3 days before the party. Douglas showed up at the apartment, let himself in with his key. I was at the dining room table with papers spread everywhere, building my presentation. I heard the door open and had maybe 30 seconds to shove everything into a drawer. He came in smiling, holding flowers. Roses, my favorite, the same ones he'd bought for our first anniversary. Said he wanted to talk, really talk, work things out. I know I haven't been transparent enough, he said, sitting down across from me. I can see how that would be concerning. Let me start over. Let me show you everything. My heart was racing so hard I thought he'd hear it. I kept my face neutral, accepted the flowers, listened to his apologies, all the while thinking about the evidence hidden 3 feet away. If he'd looked in that drawer, if he'd seen what I was planning, everything would have fallen apart. He didn't look, too confident in his own charm, too certain that I'd eventually come around. He kissed my forehead before leaving, told me he loved me, and I let him believe he'd won me over. Let him think I was that same trusting woman he'd married 32 years ago. But I wasn't her anymore. Maybe I'd never be her again. The party was at a banquet hall in Evanston, fancy enough to match Douglas's image of himself. Crystal chandeliers and white tablecloths, and a live pianist playing softly in the corner. His mother, Eleanor, had no idea what was coming. None of them did. I arrived with Richard and Marcus, carrying a folder that contained 32 years of lies. The room was full, at least 75 people. Extended family, old friends, colleagues from Douglas's accounting days, all dressed up, all smiling, all ready to celebrate. Douglas saw me walk in and his face lit up. Thought I was there to reconcile, to play the dutiful wife at his mother's birthday. He moved toward me through the crowd, arms open for an embrace. "You came," he said, relief evident in his voice. "I wasn't sure you would. Thank you." That's when I stepped up to the microphone that had been set up for toasts. The room went quiet. Douglas froze. For just a moment I saw fear flash across his face. Then that smooth mask slid back into place. He probably thought I was going to make some speech about forgiveness, about how marriages weather storms. He didn't know me anymore. Didn't know what he'd created by pushing me to this point. I looked out at the faces in that room. Douglas's family. People I'd known for decades. His mother, who'd always been kind to me, who'd welcomed me into the family, who was sitting at the head table in a lavender dress looking confused but pleased. His siblings and cousins and old friends. All of them about to learn who Douglas really was. For a second, I almost backed down. Almost took the easy route. But then I thought about Patricia, about Marcus, about all the other victims, about Phase 3 and what would have happened if that waitress hadn't intervened, about Emily, struggling in Boston while her father hoarded money he'd stolen, about my parents' cottage, sold off and funneled into accounts I'd never see. So I opened the folder and started reading. Bank statements, forged signatures, legal documents, names and dates and dollar amounts. The room was absolutely silent, except for my voice and the occasional gasp. I watched Douglas's face lose all its color, watched his mother's expression change from confusion to horror, her hand going to her throat, her eyes filling with tears. When I finished, I said something I'd rehearsed 100 times, but still came out raw and shaky. This isn't about revenge. This is about truth. and about making sure he can't do this to anyone else. Your son, your brother, your friend, has been systematically stealing from people for 30 years. I'm the longest con, but I'm not the only one. Then Richard stood up, then Marcus. One by one, the others rose. Patricia, shaking but determined. An old business partner named Tom. 2 other women I'd never met before. Women Douglas had dated and defrauded, each telling their story, each adding their piece to the mosaic of Douglas's deception. It was powerful, standing there with people who understood, who'd walked the same path, who refused to be silenced anymore. Douglas tried to defend himself, started with denial. This is ridiculous. These people are lying. They're coordinating against me for some reason. Mom, you know me. You know I wouldn't. Moved to excuses. The investments didn't work out the way I planned. I was trying to make it right. I was going to pay everyone back. Ended with anger. This is a setup. You people are trying to destroy me. I've done nothing wrong. But his words sounded hollow now. Everyone could hear it. The emptiness beneath the charm. The manipulation beneath the promises. His own mother wouldn't look at him. She sat there crying quietly while her daughter tried to comfort her. The justice that followed was external and total. Within a week, Douglas had lost access to accounts he'd hidden. Family members who'd enabled his behavior cut ties. His mother changed her will, cutting him out completely. His carefully constructed image crumbled like wet paper. The legal proceedings began. Police reports filed, civil suits initiated. He'd face real consequences for what he'd done, not just to me, but to all of us. I won't pretend it felt good, watching him fall apart. There was no satisfaction in it, just a kind of hollow relief, like watching a fever break. The man I'd loved was gone, had maybe never existed in the first place. What remained was just the con artist, stripped of his disguises. But here's the thing about justice. The external kind, the legal consequences, the public humiliation, none of that healed me. It validated me, yes. It stopped him from hurting others. But my real healing had to come from somewhere else. That's where my rebirth began. Not in courtrooms or at that party, but in the weeks and months after, when I had to figure out who I was without Douglas, without the role of dutiful wife I'd played for so long. I found my way to a local organization that supports people going through similar situations, survivors of financial abuse, elder exploitation, intimate partner fraud. At first, I just attended meetings, sat in a circle of metal chairs in a community center basement and listened to other people's stories, recognized pieces of my own experience in theirs. But gradually I started speaking up, sharing what I'd learned, offering support. Then they asked if I'd volunteer, help run workshops on financial literacy, teach people how to spot the warning signs I'd missed, how to protect themselves legally, how to trust their own instincts instead of gaslighting themselves the way I had. I said yes, and something inside me shifted. All that pain, all that humiliation, all those years of manipulation, suddenly, they had purpose. I could use my experience to help others, could turn my worst nightmare into something meaningful. There's this woman I work with now, Sarah. She's 63, married for 40 years. Her husband controls every penny. She's never seen their bank statements, doesn't know their passwords, isn't on any deeds or titles. She came to one of my workshops, and I saw myself in her eyes. That fear, that uncertainty, that bone-deep conviction that she's probably overreacting. Last week, she opened her own bank account. Just a small one, secret, with money she'd saved from grocery budgets. It was the first independent financial decision she'd made in decades. When she told me, she cried, and I cried too. Because I remember what that first step toward autonomy feels like. How terrifying and liberating it is. This is my rebirth. Not revenge. Not even justice, really. Just purpose. Taking all that negative energy, all that trauma, and channeling it into something productive, helping people stand up for themselves, giving them tools to fight back before they reach phase 3. It's been almost 3 months since that party. The legal process is ongoing. Douglas has tried to contact me multiple times, alternating between apologies and threats. I've blocked his number, changed the locks, started divorce proceedings. My lawyer says we have a strong case for recovering at least some of the stolen assets. But honestly, at this point, it's not about the money anymore. What I've learned, what I want you to understand, is that manipulators use subtle, insidious tactics to maintain control. It's crucial to recognize these patterns before they become your entire life. Douglas didn't start by forging documents and stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars. He started by handling the bills, by making me feel silly for asking questions, by slowly, patiently, methodically isolating me from my own finances. The warning signs are there, always. Someone who discourages you from being financially informed, who gets defensive when you ask about money, who makes you feel stupid or paranoid for wanting transparency, who isolates you from friends or family who might question the relationship, who controls access to accounts, documents, information. These aren't just personality quirks. They're red flags. Protect yourself financially and legally, especially as you age. Maintain your own accounts. Know where your money is. Read every document before signing. Keep copies of everything. Stay connected to people who care about you. Trust your gut when something feels wrong, even if you can't articulate why. If I could go back and tell my younger self one thing, it would be this. Your instincts are valid. That feeling in your stomach when something doesn't add up, that's not paranoia. That's your survival instinct. Listen to it. Prevention is key, but so is knowing you're not alone if you're already in it. 4 million seniors victimized every year. That's not a statistic. Those are 4 million people who believed someone they loved, who trusted when they should have verified, who thought time would fix things. 4 million people like me. But here's what the statistics don't tell you. How many of us get out? How many of us survive? How many of us take our pain and turn it into purpose? I'm one of those numbers too. A survivor, a volunteer, someone who refuses to let her worst experience be the end of her story. My daughter Emily knows everything now. She apologized for not seeing the signs, for not pushing harder when I said we couldn't help financially. I told her it wasn't her job to rescue me, that I had to rescue myself. But having her support now, knowing she understands, that means everything. She asked me recently if I regret the 32 years, if I wish I'd never married Douglas at all. I thought about it, really thought about it, and the answer is complicated. I regret the lies, the manipulation, the theft, but I don't regret my daughter. Don't regret the person I've become because of this experience. Don't regret finding my voice, even if it took 3 decades to use it. The apartment overlooks Lake Michigan still. I'm keeping it, paid for with money I recovered from the cottage sale. Douglas didn't manage to hide everything, and the courts are helping me reclaim what they can. Some mornings I stand at that window, watching the water move, and I think about that Tuesday morning when everything seemed fine, when I was living in the cage and calling it a house. I don't miss that version of me, the one who believed every lie. But I feel compassion for her. She was doing the best she could with the information she had. She loved hard and trusted deeply. Those aren't character flaws. They're vulnerabilities that someone exploited. The difference now is I know my worth. Not in dollars and cents, though I'm rebuilding that too, but in myself, my judgment, my instincts, my right to ask questions and demand answers, my right to protect myself. Last week, I gave a presentation to a group of 50 women about financial abuse. Told them my story, showed them the warning signs, taught them how to protect themselves. At the end, a woman in her 70s raised her hand. She was shaking, said her son had been handling her finances for years, and she'd started noticing irregularities. Was she being paranoid? Was she being ungrateful? I looked at her, really looked at her, and said, "Your concerns are valid. Trust yourself. Investigate. And know that whatever you find, you're not alone." She started crying. Half the room started crying. Because we all know what it's like to doubt yourself, to gaslight yourself, to choose the comfortable lie over the painful truth. And we all know what it takes to choose yourself instead. That's my real victory. Not the money Douglas will be forced to repay. Not his public humiliation or legal consequences. But the fact that I can look at myself in the mirror now and not see a victim. I see a survivor, a volunteer, a woman who took the worst thing that ever happened to her and decided to make sure it helps someone else. So thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. I know it was long. I know it was painful. But I needed you to understand the whole arc of it. How you can spend 32 years in a lie and still find your way out. How you can lose everything and still rebuild. How betrayal doesn't have to be the end of your story. Before I go, I want to share something important I learned through all of this. Something that might save you or someone you love from walking this same path. Financial abuse follows a pattern. Understanding that pattern can help you recognize it early, before you're in as deep as I was. The experts break it down into phases, and I lived through every single one. Phase 1 is subtle control. It looks like helpfulness. Your partner offers to handle the finances because they're better with numbers, or because they want to relieve your stress. They discourage you from checking accounts or reviewing statements, making it seem like you don't trust them if you ask. This phase can last years. It did for me. I thought Douglas was being considerate. In reality, he was establishing control. Phase 2 involves isolation and dependency. The controlling partner starts limiting your access to money. Maybe they put you on an allowance. Maybe they question every purchase you make. They might run up debt in your name or pressure you to sign financial documents without explanation. You become financially dependent on them, which makes leaving seem impossible. By the time Douglas sold my cottage, I was deep into phase 2. Phase 3 is where I was headed when that waitress intervened. This is when the abuser manipulates legal documents. Power of attorney, wills, property deeds, bank accounts. They forge signatures or trick you into signing things you don't understand. At this stage, you can lose not just your money, but your legal autonomy, your ability to make decisions about your own life. The scary part? Each phase feels normal while you're in it. The progression is so gradual, you don't notice you're being boiled alive until it's almost too late. Here are the concrete warning signs I wish I'd recognized. Someone who refuses to discuss finances or gets angry when you ask questions. Someone who keeps financial information hidden, like passwords, statements, or documents. Someone who pressures you to sign papers without reading them or explaining what they are. Someone who isolates you from friends or family who might question financial decisions. Someone who makes large purchases or changes without consulting you. Someone who uses your fear of seeming paranoid or untrusting to shut down legitimate concerns. If you're seeing these signs, here's what you can do right now, today. Open your own bank account at a different institution. Even if you can only put a small amount in it, establish financial independence. Request copies of all financial documents, bank statements, tax returns, property deeds, investment accounts. You have a legal right to this information. If you're married, these are your documents too. Document everything. Keep a journal of financial conversations. Screenshot suspicious transactions. Save emails or texts that don't add up. You're not being paranoid. You're being smart. Talk to someone outside the relationship, a friend, family member, or professional who can give you an objective perspective. Financial abuse thrives in secrecy. Consult with a lawyer, even if you're not ready to leave. Many offer free consultations. They can tell you what your rights are and how to protect yourself legally. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, investigate. Your gut knows things your conscious mind is trying to rationalize away. And if you're already deep in it, if you're reading this and recognizing your own life, please know, it's not too late. It wasn't too late for me at 61. It's not too late for you. There are resources available. The National Center on Elder Abuse has a hotline at 1-800-677-111-116. Adult Protective Services can investigate financial exploitation. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau offers advice on financial security for older adults. Local domestic violence organizations often help with financial abuse, even if there's no physical violence. You don't have to do this alone. I thought I did. I thought admitting what was happening meant admitting I was stupid, that I'd failed. But reaching out, connecting with others who understood, that's what saved me. That's what gave me the strength to fight back. One more thing, and this is crucial. Financial abuse is real abuse. It's not less serious because there are no bruises. The trauma is just as valid. The violation of trust is just as profound. Don't let anyone minimize what you're experiencing, including yourself. I spent years telling myself it wasn't that bad, that other people had it worse, that I should be grateful for what I had. Meanwhile, I was being systematically robbed by someone who'd promised to love and protect me. That's abuse. Call it what it is. The cost of my silence was 32 years of my life and hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the cost of speaking up? That gave me my voice back, my power, my future. Now, before I wrap this up, I want to ask you something. What would you have done in my place? When you look at my story, with the benefit of hindsight and distance, what would you have done differently? Would you have confronted Douglas sooner? Would you have investigated the moment you felt that first twinge of doubt? Would you have walked away before the legal proceedings, before the public confrontation, just taken what you could and run? I'm genuinely curious, because one thing I've learned through my volunteer work is that every person's situation is unique. What worked for me might not work for someone else. The resources I had, the support system I eventually found, not everyone has access to those things. So tell me in the comments, share your thoughts, your experiences, your advice. Because this isn't just my story anymore. It's a conversation we need to be having as a society. About financial abuse, about elder exploitation, about how we protect the most vulnerable among us while also empowering them to protect themselves. And if this story resonated with you, if it helped you see something in your own life or gave you the courage to help someone else, please like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story, because there are so many more stories that need telling, so many voices that need to be heard. I also want to recommend 2 other stories on this channel that might resonate with you. There's one about a woman who discovered her daughter-in-law was poisoning her slowly over years, and another about a man who thought his wife was having an affair but discovered something far more sinister. Both stories, like mine, are about that moment when the truth finally breaks through the lies. When you stop doubting yourself and start seeing clearly. Check your notifications, set your preferences so you know when new stories drop. Because these aren't just entertainment. They're education. They're validation. They're proof that you're not alone, that your experiences matter, that your story deserves to be heard. You know what I think about sometimes? That waitress who handed me the note. Jessica. I never got her full name beyond that. We hugged in that bathroom. She gave me her phone number, and then she went back to work like she hadn't just saved my life. I've tried to find her since, to thank her properly, but the restaurant says she quit a month after my incident. No forwarding information. I hope she knows what she did for me. How that one moment of courage on her part changed everything. I hope she's found her own peace, her own healing. I hope someone showed her the same kindness when she needed it most. That's what I want to leave you with. Be that person for someone else. If you see something, if you suspect something, speak up. Slip the note. Make the call. Offer the support. You might save a life. You might give someone the courage to save themselves. Until the next story, Take care of your heart. Protect your peace. Trust your instincts. And remember, you are never too old, never too far in, never too damaged to start over. I'm proof of that. At 61, I'm living my first truly autonomous life, building my first truly honest relationships, making my first truly informed decisions. It's never too late to become who you were meant to be. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying. Thank you for being part of this community where we tell the hard truths and support each other through them. Drop a comment, share your city, let me know what time you're listening to this. I read every single one, and your words matter to me. This is my story. But in some way, it might be yours too. And that's okay. We're going to get through this together. Every day I wake up in that apartment by the lake, I make a choice to keep moving forward, to keep helping others, to keep trusting that the future I'm building now, with my own hands and my own truth, is worth every painful step it took to get here. That's the real lesson in all of this. Not that trust is foolish, but that trusting yourself first is essential. Until next time, take care of your heart.